and welcome to another edition of the Cameron Files with your host, Grant Cameron. And now, here's your host, Grant Cameron. Grant?
Good evening. It's October the 30th, 2018. This is Grant Cameron, and you're listening to the Cameron Files. As always, thank you for taking time from your valuable schedule to listen. Fasten your seatbelts for takeoff. We're about to go very, very fast. First, an update on disclosure. The cover-up ship is taking on water like the Titanic. I think it's about to sink. There are scores of people who seem to have bits and pieces of the story. And although they are protecting their sources, many are telling me they're little bits and pieces. I feel like I'm at a Messiah convention in Las Vegas as people come to me with stories. Now to tonight's show. In 1976, after my Charlie Red Star manuscript was not published, I was given a lead which led me to study what the Canadian government had done on the subject of UFOs. That led me to studying the role of the President of the United States in the UFO mystery. It is said by President Lincoln that that it should be a government of the people, by the people, for the people. So I decided to see where we stand on the government and UFOs as we enter the upcoming election. I have two guests tonight. My first guest is Dr. Joe Buchman, who is a lifelong libertarian. He served as the Libertarian Party's National Platform Committee chair and is currently the chair of the Libertarian Party of Utah. He recently ran for Utah's 3rd Congressional District. He was a key organizer and the moderator of the 2013 Citizens Hearing on Disclosure in Washington, D.C., where he was described by the New York Times as a decades-long advocate for government transparency. Joe will help me moderate the conversation tonight. He knows a lot more about politics than I do. My second guest is an honored friend of mine. In September 2015, John Podesta, then the campaign manager for Hillary Clinton, tweeted to Lena Dunham after she had done an interview with Hillary Clinton. In that tweet, he said, "Good interview, Lena. Next time, ask Hillary about the aliens." At that point, Hillary started to wait for a UFO question from a reporter. It was not until late December 2015 when she got her first question, and that reporter is with us tonight. His name is Daymond Steer. He's with the Conway Daily Sun. I appreciate him being here because he's busy attending town halls as the election moves into its last week. Because I had written a book on the Clintons and their interest in UFOs, I contacted Daymond, and he was kind enough to talk to me. He has been bringing up the UFO issue with those running for office in New Hampshire, and he will tell us about those efforts. So welcome, Joe and Daymond. Thanks for being on my show.
Thank you for having me.
Let's good to be here. Yeah, wonderful. Let me start with Daymond, and for people who don't know, can you go through the story? You actually talked to Hillary Clinton twice, and can you talk about the importance of your position in New Hampshire in terms of being able to talk to the reporters or to talk to the politicians, how you basically get to have all the major politicians come through your office? Can you go through that and your encounter with Hillary Clinton?
Sure. I guess my first one was in Milford, New Hampshire, and I think that was in 2007, 2008 for her campaign way back then. And on a lark, I just said, "Hey, what about UFOs?" as she was leaving. And then she sat back down and she talked about the frequency of getting UFO-related requests at the White House. Grant, I think you may have been the one asking for most of those. But anyway, so she kind of humored me on that one. And then I was working at the Milford Cabinet back then, which is a paper in southern New Hampshire. Now I'm kind of in the north, and we're kind of the last stop. We're a tourist town, well known for skiing and shopping and stuff like that. So the candidates like to come through here when they run for president or Congress or whatever, or governor, and we sit around in a group and we fire questions at them, and when I can get it in, I say, "Hey, what about UFOs?" And we have the person in the primary.
Okay, and Sorry. So you get a hold of Hillary. She comes to your office, and what happens then?
Well, we sit around in a group and we fire questions at her, and then one of us, oftentimes it's me, writes the story of what she said. And one of the questions I try to get in, I don't always get it in, is, hey, what about UFOs? And, with the Tom DeLonge stuff, I guess it's more relevant now than ever, and especially the David Fravor case, and we can talk about that later if you want.
Yep. And was Hillary open to your question to her?
Yeah, she seemed like she was in a good mood, and she humored me on it. Yeah, it wasn't like she was going to sit down and talk to us for another hour, but she acknowledged that she remembered my question, and she seemed to have some enthusiasm for getting to the bottom of the UFO mystery. And I think she hedged it a little bit with national security and this and that, but she seems happy to talk about it, as to some degree.
And your editor went along with this then. After that, you were sort of given a little bit of a leash to ask other questions, correct?
Yeah, a little bit. I think our publisher thinks it's pretty funny. It took a little convincing to let me ask him. I'm sorry, for him to let me ask her. He was a little apprehensive because I said, I'm really going to ask her about UFOs, and he said, no, I don't think so. And I said, well, I've asked her about it before, and she's got this history, and I told him about Podesta, and he said, okay, if you can squeeze it in, do it. And so I did it, and then that story went around the world a couple times, I think.
And you talked to a number. You talked to Cruz as well, correct? Or a couple of the others that you posed the question.
Yeah, I did talk to a couple of the others, Kasich and Cruz, and I think Kasich, Cruz, Sanders. But we didn't get Trump. Apparently, he was the only time he ever came up this far north was a few towns over. So we didn't get to Trump, but I would have loved to ask him. And if he's listening or the NSA is listening, I'd sure love to know Trump's take on this whole thing.
Yeah. What got you into it? Were you interested? Did you have a sighting, or why would you be a reporter who is interested in asking this kind of question?
Well, why not? We're not a very uptight newspaper, so we have a little fun, and it's interesting. Most of my life is dealing with drug dealers and government officials and town meetings and budgets and politics and stuff like that. So it's a little bit of a break from that stuff. I think it's interesting. I've never had a sighting. One of my late relatives had some sightings, or at least he said he did. And I have some friends who have seen stuff, but I've never seen anything. But I haven't spent a lot of time looking either.
Wow. But you it'll be, it's almost like George Knapp. They say, George always says he's going to have Area 51 on his gravestone. You'll probably have, I talked to Hillary on your gravestone. It was kind of a big story, correct? When it broke?
Yeah, it went around the world. I mean, a lot of international news outlets picked it up. I think I saw my name in a German publication, and I think it just went all over the place.
And there's a book that you were mentioning to me. There's a book that a presidential historian who may have covered this.
Not recalling that.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, let's go to Joe. I've known Joe for a number of years, and so Joe, can you go through the citizens' hearing? It was basically, when it comes right down to it, there would have been no citizens' hearing if it hadn't been for you. Like, give me sort of your background in the political game and how you put the senators and the ex-senators and congressmen together for the citizens' hearing.
I want to be sure you can hear me. Is this mic working?
Yeah, it's working well.
Oh, sweet. It switched over to my headphones, so I don't know what's up with Skype. All this technology is a mystery to me. So it was about 6 years ago now, right now, that I had gone down to Los Angeles and hung out with Reuben Langdon and Steve Bassett. And Steve had put together an incredible thing in Los Angeles, which was the ET Media Meetup Group. And what he was searching for was Hollywood figures that might be able to create something along the line of Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth documentary, but about the ET issue. And he was attracting an ever-growing number at these monthly meetings of B-list Hollywood actors, producers, hangers-on, and whatnot around. I'm hearing some clicking in my headphones, so it's just a little distracting. I don't know if somebody can go on mute out there, but or where that's coming from. But at any rate, so Steve was doing that kind of work, and I would try to go down to LA as often as I could to sit in on those meetings, and I would buy Steve a nice meal and put gas in his car. I mean, that guy, of all the UFO activists or the ET activists, what I know from being very close to Steve Bassett is he doesn't waste anybody's money on anything, and he hasn't used any of the donations to gild his own personal life. He gets by on fumes and supporters giving him a guest bedroom or even a sofa. And that's kind of what Ruben was doing. He was housing Steve down there in these homes that they were renting to bring in largely people from China and Japan to do this virtual reality stuff in the studio that Ruben had going called Just Cause Productions. Anyways, about 6 years ago right now that I got a call from Steve that $1 million worth of funding was coming, and he was going to be able to do this project that he had only dreamed of doing, which was to create a real congressional hearing with retired members of Congress in D.C. And so it was great news. I was very excited for it, and I said, well, you ought to come announce that at the Sundance Film Festival. And that was an idea that grew an interest among the group. And yeah, maybe the citizens hearing wouldn't have happened if not for me, but boy, there's at least a couple of dozen other people you could say the same thing about. Certainly Steve Bassett, it wouldn't happen without him. Certainly Tom Clearwater, the guy who gave $1 million some odd dollars, or at least that's what it looked like initially, wouldn't happen without him. Wouldn't have happened without Merrill Cook and Carolyn Kilpatrick saying, we'll do it, and then the other members of Congress coming along. So I don't want to take too much credit for this, but I was pretty close to it from the beginning. And so they came to Sundance and announced that the hearing was fully funded, as was a documentary to be titled Truth Embargo, fully funded, going to be produced, directed by Jeremy Corbell. Ed Mitchell was on Skype at Sundance. There was a big media event for that. They rented a house. They threw some parties. They did it right. And I said to Steve, well, who have you got from Congress? And he said, well, I haven't asked anyone yet. I said, my gosh, this is early February. You're planning on doing this in late April. Even these retired members have busy calendars. You better get about inviting them. And he said, well, I felt it was important to put together the best witnesses first, the best website first, so that the members of Congress could see this as a serious effort. And I literally drove Steve to the post office where we mailed out 50 invitations about 2 weeks after the Sundance Film Festival was over. So now we're less than 2 months away. We're mid-February. So you got mid-March, mid-April. So we're 2 months and 2 weeks away from the event happening. It was about a month after that a couple of things happened. One was Tom Clearwater gave the money in hard silver. And in the process of selling the hard silver, the silver market tanked. And what looked like $1,100,000 became about $700,000. The costs for the hearing went up, and Steve called me and said, "Look, I'm going to have to refund what's left of Tom's money. We're canceling the citizens' hearing. It can't happen. I've only got one member of Congress who's agreed to do it. She's ready to withdraw. I can't find anyone else, and without members of Congress, we can't do it." And we need at least 3, and I want to have 5 ideally. And I felt almost like a divine force come out of my mouth that said, give me 24 hours. Don't cancel it. Just give me 24 hours. I'll see what I can do. And Steve said, well, there's nothing you can do. And I said, well, just let me try. I don't want you to give up till I at least try. And he said, okay. But I mean, that was a real low point for Steve and the whole process. And what happened was I picked up the phone and called Merrill Cook. I Googled him and found a phone number from his campaign for governor from a year or two before. And Merrill answered the phone at 10:30 at night and said, yeah, I'd love to do it. I'll do it. And so then we needed a third one, and I called Mike Gravel the next day. Senator Gravel had run in 2008, so this was 5 years earlier, for the Libertarian Party's presidential nomination, and he did not get it. Congressman Bob Barr got that nomination, but I'd gotten to know Mike, and I went to Mike Gravel at that convention in Denver in 2008, and I said, "Sir, I'm just honored to meet you." And those listeners out there who may not know this, Mike Gravel protected the New York Times from the Nixon administration's lawsuits over the release of the Pentagon Papers. And Mike did that as a sitting United States Senator from Alaska. He convened a midnight meeting of the one committee he chaired, which was the Buildings and Grounds Committee of the United States Capitol. And he read the Pentagon Papers into the congressional record, making them a public document. And as a sitting United States Senator, he was fully immune from any legal action for anything he said in a committee hearing or on the floor of the Senate. And that ended that lawsuit. Mike Gravel was a government whistleblower, and he went up against the Pentagon. I mean, you face death when you do that, even today. We don't prosecute whistleblowers, we persecute them in this nation, even today. You're at great risk as a member of the government blowing a whistle on government crimes. Look at Edward Snowden or Julian Assange or Chelsea Manning. These people were reporting crimes, and they don't live really comfortable lives after doing that. So I'd gone to Mike and thanked him for that as a delegate at that convention, and he remembered me when I called him. And I said, "Well, call Steve Bassett. I think you'd be perfect." And Mike called me back and said, "Yeah, Steve called me and said, yeah, Mike can't do it. He's on vacation." And I said, "Well, that's crazy." So I called Senator Gravel and said, "How did the conversation with Steve go?" And he told me. And I said, "Well, Mike, did Steve tell you that we'll pay you $20,000 plus your expenses to do this?" And he said, "No, I thought I was going to do it for free." Bassett had never told him that we were paying them, basically minimum wage for a former member of Congress. When you look at the hourly rate for 40 hours at a time, plus their travel time, plus they were all going to do homework before they hit that hearing room, I think 60, 80, maybe even 100 hours on the outside is a reasonable amount of time that they had invested in this. So 20 grand isn't a lot for somebody who's been elected to the Congress. It's a low rate for even a speaking fee. And we're asking them to do, 5 8-hour days.
Yeah.
So Gravel said, "Crap, I didn't know I was going to get paid a dime. I thought they wanted me to do it for free." I said, "Call Bassett back, tell him you'll do it for the 20 grand plus the cost of rearranging your vacation. See if they'll cover that." So then we had Mike Gravel, Merrill Cook, and Carol Kilpatrick then was willing to have her name announced as the third member. We had the three, and I saved the citizens hearing in 24 hours by doing that. After that, everybody wanted to be on not everybody, but we had a lot of other members of Congress that were willing to do it. It was just hard to get anybody willing to go first. So we got Lynn Woolsey and Darlene Hooley fairly quickly, and we were done with 5. But then Roscoe Bartlett hit our radar, and Roscoe had patents with NASA. He had a political action committee called the Every Truth Be Told Political Action Committee. So we busted the budget and went to 6. And, 20 grand in cash plus expenses, this adds up. And so I was also part of what bankrupted the citizens hearing, I suppose, by recruiting so many members of Congress. But we wound up basically taking all of the money from Tom Clearwater and spending it to produce the hearing. There was no money left to do the documentary called Truth Embargo. I don't know if you want me to go on in more detail, but in terms of causing that to happen beginning on April 29th, 2013, the 30th, May 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, one of the best weeks of my life was being involved with those hearings. I think it was and remains the most highly concentrated event with the most credible witnesses possible in front of the most respected people of high station and stature who had no real background in this issue before doing their homework in the weeks leading up to the hearing. 6 5 former members of the United States House, 1 former member of the United States Senate. It was an incredible week. Since that time, I have listened to the audio of all almost 40 hours of testimony, including the 3-hour night sessions that occurred on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday night. Monday night was Stephen Greer's Sirius movie, so really Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday in terms of people presenting. And I've typed up every word. And every one of those words, I've double-checked the spelling of South American generals and military bases in France and tried to provide citations to every fact presented by every witness. And in the process of that, I found a few errors here and there, a few misstatements. But by and large, most of the witnesses and almost all of their testimony was highly credible, and I think remains the most concentrated presentation of hard evidence on this issue ever.
Now, Daymond got a big reaction to his questioning people in the 2015 campaign, 16 campaign. What kind of reaction did the citizens' hearing get in terms of national coverage, worldwide coverage? Did the media take it seriously?
So, it was disappointing overall. In the grand scheme, prior to the funding becoming an issue, Steve had hoped to have Cheryl Jones there doing kind of a newscast during the hearings that would go out for media to pick up on. Certainly be an hour and a half long during the lunch break. And that just didn't happen. So that was cut at the last second, really, in an attempt to get the budget under control. The New York Times ran a hit piece on us, I think on Tuesday or Wednesday of the hearings, ridiculing it. And they got so much blowback that on, I believe it was Friday, May 3rd, the New York Times ran the first ever serious article about the ET issue. And that was a real tipping point in terms of media coverage. The major television stations, radio, major newspaper chains did not pick up on the hearing. There was some local coverage in Mike Gravel's hometown and Darlene Hooley's in Carolyn Kilpatrick's in Lynn Woolsey's. They picked up on that. Here in Utah, they called poor Meryl Cook was ridiculed as being Meryl Kook by being interested in this issue. That coverage for those Congress people in their local districts was certainly mixed at best. But the fact that the New York Times had to come back and publish a second article after being so thoroughly hammered for running what was a kind of a comedic hit piece earlier in the week was extraordinary. Secondly, international media picked up on this. We had witnesses from 10 different nations. We translated the citizens' hearing into 3 different languages in real time, Spanish and Mandarin, as well as broadcasting it in English. That was available as a live stream. I'm certain there were members of congressional staff who were not present at the National Press Club's main ballroom to see it happening live, who were perhaps surreptitiously almost watching it in congressional offices or other locations around the country that other political figures, military people with knowledge of this event were watching, but especially internationally. So Dr. Sun Shu Lee got coverage in China. I'm spacing the pilot's name from South America, Santa Maria. Colonel Santa Maria, his testimony was riveting. We had a member of a South American national delegation there who Colonel Santa Maria brought with him. And, I'd have to go back and look at the transcript, refresh my memory. I wasn't expecting to do this. I haven't thought about some of these things in more than a year. But so there was international coverage that was taken far more seriously. And I think, Grant, from your own research, as does anybody who's looked at the ET issue, international media outside of the United States and Great Britain cover this far more seriously than we do here in the United States. And so that was available out there. And of course, that body of video is still out there. It's available on YouTube. The whole first day is out there for free, I believe. There's certainly pirated video that's out there, and then there's also a Vimeo purchase it option that Ruben Langdon and Jeremy Cordell have maintained and are making a little bit of money off. There was a falling out about a year after the hearings between them and Steve Bassett. So Mr. Bassett's not involved with the citizens hearing video content anymore. Although that may change in the next months or year. We'll see. The transcript that I typed up, I've been asked to sit on because Ruben and Jeremy hope to monetize the citizens hearing, and they have, in their wildest dreams, hope to be able to pay Tom Clearwater back. That $1,100,000 in funding that fell in value to $700,000 was not a gift; it was a loan. Tom hoped, it was an investment that he hoped when the documentary Truth Embargo was produced and released in theaters and maybe bought by some cable channel, he could get his money back. I don't think he's gotten anything back yet. But I don't know. I'm not involved with Jeremy and Ruben at that level. Okay. But the media coverage, was minor in some respect, but I think the fact that the New York Times had to basically publish a retraction and cover us seriously was huge. And I think the international impact was significant.
Hey, Grant?
Yeah, go ahead, Daymond.
Sorry, I remember that book that you mentioned. It was Chasing Hillary by Amy Chosick, the New York Times report.
And you're mentioned in there, correct?
Not me in particular, but the Conway Daily Sun.
Okay. Can you go?
And by the way, good for you and the Conway Daily Sun. That was huge. I'm a fan. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Daymond, talk to us about the present cycle of, and then we'll go to Joe if anything's happening there. But I was going to have Bettina Aguilera on. She's agreed to do an interview, but not tonight. And she ran for the GOP in Florida, lost the primary there to run for the House. But Daymond, you've had some interactions with the present cycle. Can you talk about who's running in New Hampshire and who you've talked to and what kind of reaction you've gotten in this present election cycle?
Sure. I just first want to make the point that Mike Gravel has been up here for one of his presidential runs, and he signed our refrigerator. So we have a tradition called Air Force One, Refrigerator One or Fridge One or something like that. Anyway, the candidates, including Barack Obama, have signed our refrigerator. And
I think we all have to get to Conway sometime. I would love to see that fridge.
Yeah, absolutely. It used to be behind me, but now it's downstairs, so it's more on display. And you could take advantage of our gorgeous scenery and tax shopping anytime. Anyway, so our present cycle this is a midterm election. So we have Republican Eddie Edwards versus Chris Pappas, the Democrat, and I guess Eddie would be our disclosure candidate because he said if he wins, he'll invite me to Washington to go talk about UFOs. So we'll keep our fingers crossed that if he does win, then I'll get to go down there and blabber on about UFOs. But anyway, congressional.
Is he leading?
No, he's not. In the last polls I heard of, and we looked into it, I think last week or so, but he was down last time I looked into it. But anyway, it's a neck and neck race. I mean, he's only, I think one poll had him down by 6 or 8, and some other polls have him down by like 1 point. But anyway, I just want to make the point about Congressional District 1. It's one of the swingiest congressional districts in the nation, and it's gone back and forth between the Republicans and the Democrats for the last decade. And it's been the incumbent Carol Shave Porter versus Frank Ginta for the last 10 years. But now we have these new candidates. And the other special thing about New Hampshire is, I don't know if you recall that Guardian article by Nick Pope about the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee looking into the Nimitz case. Well, Jean Shaheen is our U.S. Senator. She's not up for re-election this year, but she's one of our U.S. Senators, and she's on that committee. So every time I see our North Country liaison guy, I say, hey, Chuck, what about UFOs? You know, ask the senator about UFOs. I don't know if he passes the message along, but he's always polite.
Wow. So you are still on the beat and trying to get the word out there. What do you think, Joe? Is there anybody you know that's running in this election cycle that might be sort of friends with us?
Well, there's me. I'm running for the Utah State House, District 27 this year.
Okay.
And had a debate a week ago. This issue did not come up. You know, Utah is an interesting place because we have what's sometimes called Area 52 out to the west of here, south of Tooele, Utah, the Dugway Proving Grounds. When UFO hunters and Bill Burns were doing their History Channel show, they actually interviewed me out there on the Salt Flats near the Great Salt Lake. I didn't wind up in an episode of UFO Hunters. I guess I wound up on the cutting room floor. But, you know, they were exploring the possibility that some of the super secret stuff that used to occur, or maybe used to occur at Area 51, could still be occurring there, might have gotten moved north. You know, there's rumors of underground tunnels and facilities. But the interesting thing about the Dugway Proving Grounds is, unlike Area 51, it's not accessible from anywhere to look at any of it. There's no hillside, there's no dirt road, there's nothing. And it's kind of surrounded by a little bit of a scary area where the United States government has its biological and chemical weapons in deteriorating 55-gallon drums from the World War II area that they have built an incinerator out there to burn this stuff up. And they're going through the process of doing that with a massive alarm system to warn all of us if something should go wrong. And so it's not an area that people just wander out to try to watch what's going on. Hill Air Force Base is just north of there. This is the area that was used for the training flights for the Enola Gay when they were dropping concrete shapes, they call it, things that weigh as much as a nuclear bomb, but they were practicing their bombing runs out there. Some of that's starting to come back. They're creating, they've restored a hangar, and they're preserving some of that history. But there's still a big chunk of Utah that the government uses for keeping secrets in. When I ran for the United States House last year in the special election that occurred because Jason Chaffetz resigned, I was challenged in a debate by one of my opponents about having raised the UFO issue, and there was some giggling in the room. And I said, you know, I appreciate you bringing this up. Certainly it's an issue we should take seriously. For over a decade now, I also ran for the United States Congress back in 2008. I guess I should back up and tell that story. Yeah. When I ran in 2008, I had gone out to Washington, D.C. for one of Steve Bassett's X conferences, which, like the ET Media Meetup in Hollywood, which Steve deserves undeserved praise for what he was creating in Hollywood. Likewise, he deserves that for what he created when he lived in Washington, D.C. The X conferences were fantastic. I imagine, Grant, you probably spoke at a couple of X conferences, or maybe all of them.
Yeah, I was there when you were there in 2008. I remember you being there.
I apologize for not remembering if that's the one you were at or not, but it's where I, you know, got to see Ed Mitchell again. I met Paul Hellyer. John Alexander was there. He had some heavy hitters, and he put them right in the backyard of the United States Congress there in Gaithersburg. And I know there were people associated with congressional staffs that were coming up to see what was being presented there. And so the Libertarian Party of Utah had approached me about running for the United States Congress that year. And I agreed to do it. Our state convention was at the same time as the X conference. So I got a phone call. Yes, you've received the nomination. And I knew I'd be on the ballot. And I went with Steve and probably you, Grant, and some others in the subway and down to the National Press Club where Steve had a press conference. And that's where I announced that I would run for the United States House in Utah's 1st district. This was when I lived up in Park City. And it was covered by the Salt Lake Tribune and some other media there in D.C. But of course, they ran a hit piece, a comedy piece. The Park Record newspaper ran the headline, "Immigration Taxes and Little Green Men, Libertarian Candidate with a Twist, Joe Buchman." And they covered my campaign on the front page of the paper. The Tribune covered it kind of as a joke, and KSL Radio covered it. They called my wife at 5 in the morning and woke her up here in Utah, trying to get me back in D.C. at 7 a.m. To be interviewed on the radio, and just ridiculed me. But anyway, so then when I was asked about it in the debate, I said, look, I've been running on this issue for a decade, and what I've consistently called for as a solution to federal government overspending is congressional hearings on waste, fraud, criminal activity, and the ET issue. And prior to those hearings, passing legislation that eliminates any contracts that restrict military or NASA or government officials or contractors from any secrecy oaths they've signed that prohibit them from discussing waste and fraud and criminal activity and the birthright issue of whether we're alone in the universe. And the audience in that debate last year applauded me. And my challenger who'd brought it up realized he didn't want to do that again because it's a serious issue. And I know, because I have friends who've had positions at the Pentagon, very high positions, and that I don't talk about. I may once they pass on. But I also have a friend who is Chief Medical Officer of NASA who I do talk about, Roger Billica. Roger served as Chief Medical Officer in Houston. He's now in private practice. And I'll say to Roger and anyone listening, he will not discuss this issue with me. He's asked me not to ask him about this issue, not of waste and fraud and criminal activity, but of the ET engagement with humanity. Because he tells me, as much as he might like to talk about these things, there are certain contracts you sign to get those kind of jobs with NASA. And if he were to talk about it, he could go to a place worse than Leavenworth. His wife would lose the pension, the health care benefits, and all that. So he's not violated, as far as I'm aware, any of his secrecy commitments. He certainly won't talk about the issue. I sure wish he would. But I'd like to see him and others relieved of any contractual agreements they've signed. Why on earth would any government contractor or employee be prohibited from reporting a criminal act by our government? That's insanity, especially as a libertarian. I think it's outrageous. Or waste, or fraud, or for heaven's sakes, the birthright issue of whether we're alone in the universe or not. We should have legislation that eliminates those kind of contracts, and then we should hold open hearings. And if you were there in 2008, I've been doing that for more than a decade now. It's a passion of mine. I absolutely believe it to be true. The other thing I'll tell you, if you don't mind my going on, cut me off if you do. But that was the X conference where Edgar Mitchell was the keynote speaker. And I was sitting at Ed's table. And Steve, God bless him, he had crammed more people into that small ballroom than ever before. The waiters could hardly move from table to table to deliver the food. And it was all running late. And in the process of getting an extra table in the room so Steve could sell some extra tickets to that dinner, they took out the steps to the stage. And so Dr. Mitchell, at the age of, I think, almost 80, or maybe he was 81, 82, got up on that stage, gave his speech, and he came to get off the stage, and there were no steps. And so I instinctively stood up to help the sixth man to walk on the moon down from the stage. And Dr. Mitchell said, "Thanks, Joe." And I said, "You're welcome, Dr. Mitchell. I know that would have been one long step for a man." Parroting Neil Armstrong's line, that was a small step for a man. That would have been one long step for a man. Well, everybody at Ed Mitchell's table broke up laughing, except for Ed Mitchell, who just stared at me like he wanted to kill me. I guess he had heard that Neil Armstrong line one too many times. But I'll always be grateful to Steve Bassett for creating moments like that in my life. I also got to be on a panel of political activists in 2008 at that X conference. But no, other than me, I'm not aware of it. There are 780 or so libertarians running for elective office in this midterm election. It's more than twice what we had in 2016 or 2014 in the midterms. And I know every one of them is committed to government transparency, and most of them don't want to touch the ET issue because libertarians are already seen as wacky enough without going there. But for me, It's just part of who I am. It's so easily Googleable that it's nothing I can even hide if I wanted to.
Okay. Let me go back to Daymond. Daymond, you and I got together. In fact, I sort of bugged you. The To the Stars Academy, and we've only got a few minutes, but we can I want you to tell the story, whatever you're able to tell. When that thing breaks, I contact you and tell you, file an FOA, get moving on this thing. Are you able to talk about what happened there in terms of your effort to try to uncover what was going on there?
Well, I think I filed my first ever FOIA on the federal level. We have a similar thing at the state. But anyway, I filed a letter asking for information relative to that ATIP program, or whatever they call it now. And I got some letters back that they were working on it, and then I haven't heard anything since. And I also want to ask Joe about the I was thinking if I was a U.S. Senator or something, I'd really want to know from Robert Bigelow where that government money went and what he did with it. And I'd love to ask him lots of questions under oath about what happened with that money, that program.
I could talk about that briefly. I toured Bigelow Aerospace back in late May or early June when the Society for Scientific Exploration held their conference in Las Vegas. And for those listeners who don't know what that is, it is an extraordinary organization made up of legitimate academics, mostly, who are at major universities, mostly with tenure, who are interested in edge science, remote viewing, remote perception, remote influencing, near-death experiences, afterlife experience, the origins of human consciousness, the ET issue, all of that. It's an organization that's been around for 40 years or so. They publish a journal on edge science, and they hold an annual conference. I've presented at that conference now 3 times, I believe, and initially on the citizens hearing on disclosure. I think the year after, maybe 2014, I was there. And so this year it was held in Las Vegas, and one of the long time members of the Society for Scientific Exploration is none other than Dr. John Alexander. And John has written UFOs, Myths, Realities, and Conspiracies. He's written another book called Reality Denied. You'll find me acknowledged in there along with my wife for proofreading that book during the solar eclipse trip that John went with us on last year. So John said, Joe, you got to come to Las Vegas. I'm hosting the Society for Scientific Exploration this year. And he gave me a heads up that he had arranged with Bob Bigelow to bring 100 participants from the SSE conference out to Bigelow Aerospace for a 4 or 5 hour long tour. Maybe even longer, because we ate lunch on the bus on the way out there. And I'm like, well, I ain't missing that. So I signed up, and there were probably 200 or 300 people at the SSE and probably 200 people who wanted to go tour Bigelow that got turned away. It was, first come, first served. It was an extraordinary day. Com Kelleher was my small group leader. They divided us up into 5 or 6 small groups to tour various areas of Bigelow Aerospace. Bob Bigelow was there. I got to shake his hand. This was just after the news came out that part of the Bigelow Aerospace infrastructure had been hardened to meet national security requirements for storing metamaterials of a apparently non-human origin. and that had just come out in the news. The ATIP stuff had come out. None of that was discussed at Bigelow Aerospace, but it was discussed by Hal Puthoff in an extraordinary presentation to the SSE. Dr. Puthoff received the Dinsdale Award from the SSE for his contributions to remote viewing, zero-point energy, and UFOs. And Dr. Puthoff began his talk to the SSE by saying, I still publish on quantum energy fluctuation. I just had an article in a European journal a few months earlier. You're aware that I was one of the co-founders of the International Remote Viewing Association. But you might wonder why I've been getting an award for the ET issue when I've never said or published anything about it. It's because I was part of a highly classified program, and if I had done so before now, I would have gone to jail, so hang on to your seats. I was in the audience for this. I was blown away. I called Steve Bassett immediately after and described what Puthoff had said. And Steve encouraged me to go to Puthoff and ask him a couple of questions, which I later did. But what I did that was a little dangerous or a little out there was I went to the audio guy at the back of the room and I said, you know, I write for a website. I'd really like to get that quote of Puthoff's accurate. Could you send me the audio? Because there were clear no audio-visual recording of the SSE conference by participants in the room. And so I went to the audio guy and said, hey, could you send me this clip? I want to be sure I get this one quote right. So the audio guy sent me the whole 3 hours. It was that whole section of Puthoff and John Alexander's presentation and the Q&A. I got all the audio. I didn't record it, so I didn't violate my contract with SSE. And I typed it all up. Steve typed part of it. I proofread it, typed up other parts of it, and we sent that out. First of all, I sent it to Com Kelleher. I got Com's email address just from overhearing it that day. And said, hey, I typed this up. I thought you might like to pass it on to Hal. I hope he appreciates it. I thought he might like a written version of his presentation. And Kelleher thanked me for it. Said, I couldn't make Hal's presentation. I'm so grateful you did this. This is wonderful. I'll certainly pass it on to Hal. I heard nothing from Hal. And then Steve put it up on the PRG website, and I was afraid I might get some blowback from the SSE people. I'm still not sure I won't, if they'll ever invite me back again. But John Alexander and I had a conversation. He said, Joe, you're fine. Nobody's going to be upset. I don't know. But I'm the reason that transcript is out there. I think that's the most extraordinary thing since the citizens hearing. If Dr. Hal Puthoff saying, in answer to a question from the audience, John Alexander says he went knocking on doors inside the government and there were no programs researching this. And Puthoff says something like, well, he just didn't knock on enough doors. And somebody else asked a question, we only got 22 million. That doesn't seem like that's serious. And Puthoff says, well, there's other money going elsewhere with other parts of the government that are studying this. These are incredible things that were said at that conference and are now, thanks to that transcript, out on the internet available for anybody to see. The quote I told the audio guy I was looking for, Puthoff said, so we're losing our inability to see what's really going on here. By which he was saying it's not human created stuff. He said there are metamaterials that I would like to talk about, but that's all still highly classified, except for this one public source metamaterial that was given to Art Bell, Art's Parts. And it's a magnesium bismuth layering that at the time no foundry on Earth created. They searched everywhere, multinationally, and there's only a limited number of places that could begin to make stuff like this. None of them reported making it. And further, when they were tasked with trying to reverse engineer and create this, could not. And we didn't understand what on earth it could have been used for. Now, 20 years later, it looks like bismuth magnesium layering makes really good waveguides for terahertz frequencies. Wow.
We've got about 3 minutes left. Can I ask both of you, we're in the election season. Are you hopeful as to what's happening in terms of disclosure, in terms of what's happening with the Senate Armed Services Committee? So we can maybe close with that for a comment from both of you. What you think is going to happen? Are you optimistic as to what's going on?
Well, I kind of feel like Charlie Brown is a football here. And so I'm not going to hold my breath.
I'll tell you, I'm hopeful for a couple things. Donald Trump signed right to try legislation, meaning at end-of-life care, you should have the right to try LSD, psilocybins, anything you want. That's a hard libertarian policy issue that it took President Trump, someone like him, to sign in the same way that only Nixon could have gone to China. I'm hopeful he'll deschedule cannabis. I think that would be huge and energize some in the left to maybe look at him less disparagingly. And I think Trump is such a unprecedented, unpredictable cannonball, train wreck, whatever, that perhaps this issue is in play in a way that it's never been in play before. I know Steve and I disagree on that. Steve thinks the exact opposite. He also thinks that Trump will be forced to resign or impeached, and then that will move the issue forward. I don't know, but I'm a little bit more hopeful, not in terms of this fall, but in the coming year or two. There's so much chaos within our federal government that anything could break loose, even this.
Daymond, are you still intending to, when it comes 2020, they come through, have you still got a sort of a green light to talk to, say if Trump comes through or whoever's running against Trump in the next election? Are you still sort of in the good graces of your newspaper in terms of doing this kind of stuff?
Sure. Yeah, I'll give it a shot.
Yeah, and when do they start coming through? Isn't that actually going to be late this next year? Isn't 2019 when they start?
Yeah, roughly. Yep, sometime the end of next year. We'll see him again.
Yeah, so we're like a year away from people traipsing through Conway campaigning for the presidential nominations of their parties.
Yes.
Feel free to challenge whoever our Libertarian nominee or candidates are at that time. Please do. I wish the Libertarian Party would stop hiding and shrinking away from this issue.
Yeah, they're welcome to come up here and we can talk about a whole bunch of stuff.
You know, Gary Johnson was governor of New Mexico for the 50th anniversary of the Roswell event back in '97.
He also signed up the refrigerator.
Yeah, that's great. I expect you'll be seeing Bill Weld. Bill Weld is currently campaigning for the Libertarian presidential nomination in 2020, former governor of Massachusetts.
Well, he's not too far away.
Yep.
Wow.
What do you think, Grant? Instead of asking us,
I'm pretty optimistic in terms of what I see as being leaked. It's incredible, the amount of material that people are running around with, and this whole metamaterial thing. I don't know if you saw the interview or the Lou Elizondo's presentation in Italy. This happened a couple of days ago. And in that, he actually talks about the involvement of the Weird Desk of the CIA. And this is Kit Green, Ron Pandolfi, all this kind of stuff. That just blew me away when he brought this up. And then he shows all the metamaterials. They've got about 10 different pieces. And I know a couple of pieces that they didn't show. There's an awful lot going on that I never thought I'd see this day. I think I'm sort of like with George Knapp, that I never thought I'd live to see the amount of material that's coming out and sort of I'm pretty optimistic in terms of this To the Stars activity and what's coming out. So I don't know about the political thing. Your whole political system, to me, it seems to be totally deadlocked in terms of getting anything done. Even if it was like saving kids from childhood cancer, I mean, you couldn't get anything through the House and the Senate right now, the way it's sort of deadlocked.
I think we're certain. Go ahead.
I was just thinking, you could almost have a campaign of "Show me the medals."
Yeah, show me the medals. I like that.
We talk about a lot of stuff, but Ron Pandolfi did this or that or the other thing, but it's just like, come on, man, show us this stuff.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting scenario. We'll have to maybe do this again next year when we get into the next sort of election thing. And I wish you good luck, Joe, on your campaign there. You've always sort of been at the front leading edge of the political thing and speaking well in terms of a very sort of forceful argument that makes a lot of sense, that as you said, nobody really wants to take you on because you actually know what you're talking about. So I appreciate that. And I do appreciate Daymond for really turning things around in terms of actually confronting these people about the subject when a lot of reporters would sort of back away from it.
I appreciate that, Grant. I met with my Republican opponent in the members-only dining room of the United States Capitol, in the very heart of that, and challenged him over lunch to look into this issue. And what he said was, as a junior member of Congress, I'm not going to have access to those kind of briefings. And I said, well, when you do, let me know. And I got to tell you, he took it seriously. I was not laughed at by a sitting member of the United States House. I also, in running for the State House here, have the listening of the likely guy who's going to get elected. And So, when you run as a third-party candidate, it's a great way to bring attention to this issue. I'd encourage all of our listeners to consider running for office, because you win by earning the respect of the other candidates running, especially if you can get into debates. And
Beautiful.
so just do it.
Beautiful. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it. We'll do it again, and I really appreciate the input you put, so thanks.
Anytime, Grant.
Okay, I'll send it back to Bill.